If you watched yesterday's video, you'll know how Don Revie built the foundations of Leeds United. They were back in the big time, they'd got their first shot across the bow with a title challenge and an FA Cup final, and now they'd built up a reputation. Dirty Leeds were here and they just might have been the best team in England. Leeds were big leagues now, so entered the 1965-66 season with big ideas. Unfortunately, those ideas led them down the path of Blackpool's Alan Ball, who would ultimately reject the club after a year of the 1965 version of a transfer saga. As a fallback, Revie leaned on the academy to give Peter Lorimer and Paul Madeley's senior team promotions. If you watched yesterday's video, you'll know the club's first European campaign was sullied by the broken thigh of Bobby Collins as Leeds lost their most influential player. However, they dug in to win their first European tie with a dogged 0-0 draw in Turin. Back home, Leeds were flying once again, thanks to the midfield of Johnny Giles and Billy Bremner clicking in the middle of the park. They topped the league in autumn, but only their 4 games in hand kept them from the top by the time of a double header with the league leaders on December 27th and 28th. So yeah, the FA have always had batshit scheduling. A win apiece kept things as they were heading into 66, well in the mix of a title race, alongside Liverpool, Burnley, Man United, Stoke and Chelsea. Injuries continued to pile up as Alan Peacock's season was ended in a meek defeat up at Rocco Park, whilst Chelsea continued to be a thorn in Revie's side when the Londoners eliminated Leeds from the FA Cup 4th round. League form understandably slumped as Leeds learned all about fighting on a continental front. Eddie Gray made his debut in a 1-1 draw at home to Valencia before something which was becoming a typical Revie performance away in Europe. They inflicted Valencia's first home European defeat at the Mestalla, whilst Hungary's Újpest came more quietly despite a prolonged pitch invasion from a dog. It took 3 legs for Real Zaragoza to get rid of them in the semi-final. The Elland Road replay, after Don Revie enlisted the local fire brigade to waterlog the pitch, did little to stifle the Spaniards as they won out 3-1. Maybe it was a good job the Fairs Cup provided a distraction, as Shankly's Liverpool simply romped to the league and would have been an almighty effort from Leeds to go the distance domestically. And yet the poor league form lurched to the disastrous at the start of the 1966-67 campaign, where Leeds won just 4 league matches before November. A 7-0 pumping off West Ham in the League Cup hardly helped, magnified by the fact that Revie actually put a full-strength squad out now the carrot of a Wembley final was dangled in front of them. If that wasn't bad, they went to Liverpool and took a 5-0 tonking, and that was their last defeat in 1966, a run which recovered Leeds to 6th. A mere wobble, Bremner was now captain, Lorimer had ended a goal drought as Leeds got better and better. They beat Valencia at the Mestalla again, were infinitely more fortunate to call blue on a coin toss to defeat Bologna in a quarter-final as they drew Kilmarnock in the final 4. 3 games were needed to dispatch off Sunderland at Brewferry Park in the FA Cup, by no means the last time the Black Cats would claw at Revie. A squeezing beyond Manchester City in the 6th round meant an outside chance of a treble. As the scheduling got worse, Leeds got better and moved up to 4th with games in hand despite winning 4 matches inside of 1 calendar week. Of all places, it was a goalless draw at Filbert Street that killed the title dream, and thankfully, after FWA Footballer of the Year Jack Charlton was ruled out for the rest of the season, Europe was already confirmed. Charlton would be missed as Leeds controversially lost to Chelsea in the FA Cup semi-final, not helped by Peter Lorimer's free kick being disallowed because the defensive wall didn't retreat 10 yards. Thankfully, Leeds weren't punished for scoring the goal that the opposition made harder in the Fairs Cup semi-final, where Kilmarnock were dispatched. And because of the quirky Fairs Cup scheduling, Jack Charlton would be back for the final against Dynamo Zagreb, as it would be played at the start of the 67-68 campaign. The promise of a major cup final in August weighed heavily on Leeds as they succumbed to a poor league start again, and it didn't come to fruition anyways. Dynamo taught them a lesson back in Zagreb, and Leeds were frozen with fear of shipping away goals at Elland Road, confirming a 2-0 aggregate defeat. Squad turnover came from the academy again. Goalkeeper David Harvey received a promotion, whilst Terry Hibbett and Mick Bates edged closer to the senior team. In Revie terms, it was a hectic summer of movement as Mick Jones was brought in from Sheffield United for £100,000, whilst both Willie Bell and Alan Peacock departed. Fairs Cup disappointment led to an angry Leeds, slinking into a title race with the highlight of a 7-0 thrashing over a managerless Chelsea. A resilient Leeds kept up with leaders Manchester United despite being hampered by injuries to Jones and Giles, as well as a 28-day suspension for Billy Bremner for just a singular red card against Fulham. It appears Leeds' reputation preceded them. The League Cup was rarely a plus point, but once Leeds put Derby out of their misery with 3 wins in a short space of time, they became favourites to lift the cup. The Cup trilogy would later be sensationalised in the Damn United as Revie met Clough for the first time. More on him a bit later. When Terry Cooper slammed a volley into the roof of the Wembley net against Arsenal, Don Revie and Leeds had their first trophy. Riding the crest of the wave, Leeds took apart the Fairs Cup once again, and Leeds being Leeds, this obviously meant that league form suffered. And yet they'd combined numerous fronts with an unbeaten start to 1968, winning 9 of 14 matches to go top of the league on goal average. A year after Celtic had won the seemingly unrepeatable quadruple, Leeds had it in their hands as well. The Fairs Cup was turned into a quasi-Scottish tour as Leeds sunk their third Scottish opponent in Dundee, former European Cup semi-finalists, thanks to an Eddie Gray winner at home. It couldn't get much better, as Peter Dobin proved when he bagged himself a hat-trick for Stoke at the Victoria ground as Leeds were finally defeated. And then the quadruple dream unravelled. Everton dispatched of Leeds in a poor Old Trafford FA Cup semi-final, and successive defeats against Liverpool, Arsenal and Burnley left Leeds fourth in a 2-horse race. Of all teams, it was Manchester City who snuck in like a thief in the night, winning the league as their neighbours became the first English team to lift the European Cup. And yet the double was kinda still on as Leeds met Ferencváros in the Fairs Cup final, only at the start of the 68-69 season. That season's first official match was a triumphant 1-0 against the Hungarians at Elland Road. Revie lined up in a 4-1-4-1 despite grumbles from Leeds fans that they were conservative away from home and in Europe. It was that conservatism, however, that clinched Leeds' first European trophy when Ferencváros were held to a typical Revie goalless draw in Budapest. Europe could be said to be conquered, and Leeds were buoyed by such success, going undefeated in the first 11 games with 9 wins as Revie leaned on the entertaining football that the fans craved. Losses at Main Road and Turf Moor either side of 3 goalless draws as autumn became winter felt like a derailment, but then Leeds went the season undefeated. Yep, no drama to be seen here, no dramatic paragraphs can be sculptured by me here. Leeds absolutely romped their first league title. A return to the defensive mode confirmed the title with a point at Anfield, pulling the league away from their rivals. 6 points of difference doesn't sound like a lot, but would be an 8-point difference these days, with Leeds claiming 94 points, of the 3 points for a win rule being in place in 1969. The rest ultimately was sacrifice, which only proved just how good Leeds were if the schedules were a little bit lighter. Ujpres knocked them out of Europe, and teams like Crystal Palace and Sheffield Wednesday dumped Leeds out of the domestic cups. But Leeds had finally won the league, and winning the league in 1969 means the European Cup, and the question now was, would they be able to compete at the highest of high levels? But before we answer that, I need to tell you about how I watch every single Premier League match completely legally, which means it's VPN time! A VPN hides your IP address, which lets you safeguard your internet connection. So, the absolute opposite of what the Manchester United defence would do. Am I right? No? Okay. And for those who haven't skipped this YouTube advert because you bloody love a bag, and here's why you should choose private internet access, today's video sponsor. 1. They're offering you an insane 83% VPN discounts and 4, count them, 1, 2, 3, 4 months completely free See it like Manchester City buying Citigroup players for a knockdown price. 2. You can protect an unlimited amount of devices at the same time. Chelsea's transfer strategy for 1. You want 783 devices protected, just buy them all up and protect them. 3. You can access region-restricted content from all over the world 365 days a year. Good news for Spurs fans whose passports are usually back in that cupboard by December. That is private internet access. Links to the discount in the description. Don Revie's Leeds United were competitive in Europe, but they hadn't met the European Cup yet. And the European Cup meant a rare splurge on the transfer market when Alan Clark was plucked from Leicester for £165,000. But Leeds were never going to get too distracted by their first ever European Cup tie, winning an almost record 16-0 over Lyn Oslo, just too short of Benfica's record against Stade Dudelange 4 years prior. They were a little draw heavy as their 34-match unbeaten run was finally ended at Goodison Park on August the 30th. Their League Cup elimination at the hands of who else but Chelsea was quickly soothed by progression against a Ferencváros team who were now missing Florian Albert and Julia Rakosi in the European Cup. In the meantime, league form picked up as Leeds joined Everton in what was a two-horse race despite drawing 10 of their first 25 matches. Revenge over the Toffees came before New Year, only tightening their grip on the title race further by grabbing 5 goals at Stamford Bridge to kickstart 1970. A kind draw was busy taking Leeds to the brink of the FA Cup and tentatively to a potential treble, but they would be met with Manchester United in the domestic cup, while Standard Liège proved tricky on the road to a Battle of Britain with Celtic in Europe. They were unfortunate to need a replay to dispose of Man United in the cup after Paul Madeley's late disallowed goal, but Billy Bremner's 9th minute strike in the third match ended 219 goalless minutes between the pair. Leeds were in the cup final once more. 5 days later, they had the visit of Celtic. But first, the throwing away of the league after they shipped 7 goals in 2 games against Southampton and Derby because the FA wanted the domestic season wrapped up by April the 21st thanks to the World Cup. Yet another brilliant scheme. Revie had to sacrifice a league for a shot at the ultimate glory, and thanks to the other semi-final pitting Feyenoord with Legia Warsaw, Leeds vs Celtic was truly the final before the final. George Connolly's away goal in Yorkshire was equalised by Billy Bremner back on his personal home soil at Hampden in front of a still European Cup record crowd of 136,000 supporters. A lot of water had passed under the bridge in the 2 weeks between the legs though. First off, Everton won the league thanks to their win over West Brom. Secondly, Leeds were bizarrely fined by the FA for fielding a weakened team in the league against Derby. You know, that Monday League fixture after the Saturday League fixture and before the European Cup fixture on Wednesday. Jurgen Klopp and Pep Guardiola would have heart palpitations. Pressured into fielding a strong team the day after the first leg of a European Cup semi-final resulted in a meaningless 2-2 draw with West Ham and a meaningful injury to Paul Reaney, who broke his leg. 4 days before the second leg in Glasgow, the small matter of an FA Cup final played on a Wembley turf ruined by the Horse of the Year show. A ruinous pitch replicated in a good old scrap which fairly generated a replay at Old Trafford. Back to Glasgow with the teams deadlocked on 1 away goal apiece and 3 quarters into the tie. The European Cup was hanging in the balance, but Leeds wilted inside of 6 second half minutes thanks to John Hughes' glanced header and Bobby Murdoch sealing the deal. The FA Cup final could not be described as a consolation prize as long as Leeds hadn't won it, and in front of 28.49 million on the telly and 62,000 in the ground, Dave Webb bundled in the 104th minute winner to continue Chelsea's good form against Leeds. In the somehow trophyless season, Don Revie claimed the Manager of the Year award, small consolation as it was. It was quickly forgotten about after rattling to wins in their first 5 matches of the subsequent season, and they only lost in the remainder of 1970 away to Stoke again, and in the League Cup at Bramall Lane whilst Leeds returned to the damp squib known as the Fairs Cup. Despite Leeds' magnificent form, Arsenal were still in the conversation, creeping up on them. So when Leeds were handed yet another FA charge for Jack Charlton's quip, About having a little black book of names he wished to exact revenge on, it could have been a wobble. And yet the FA's scheduling was this time kind enough for Leeds to go on a run only dented by a home loss to Liverpool in the league and, most shockingly of all, away to Colchester United in the 5th round of the Cup. At least they could focus on league matters now, keeping hold of that 3-point advantage over the Gunners with a game in hand. Vitoria Setúbal were more difficult than they had any right to be in the Fairs Cup quarter-final as Peter Lorimer dumped them out to continue his rich vein of form. It confirmed a semi-final spot against Liverpool, a needlessly high-tension match at a time when the league would be wrapping up. A loss at Stamford Bridge wasn't ideal, neither were draws at St James's Park and Leeds Road, just as Peter Lorimer's season was in its pomp though, his season was ended by injury. Bloody Easter again, that little chocolate bunny celebration has stuck another spanner in Leeds' plans as Arsenal kept winning and winning and winning. They had 3 matches in hand because of their marathon FA Cup run and suddenly were only 4 points behind ahead of an April 26th showdown between the two at Elland Road in between Fairs Cup legs. The match was decided by a sole goal with an archetypal Revie performance thanks to Bremner's away goal at Anfield and a goalless draw at home. A third European final for Leeds was confirmed. Leeds were flying high as 2 days prior they had salvaged an outside chance of winning the league. They thought they had blown it after a shocking home defeat to West Brom, shocking for its scoreline and shocking for its winning Baggies goal that was 3 times offside with a pinch of refereeing shambles in stopping and restarting the play. This mess combined with 2 1-0 wins through Charlie George for Arsenal seemingly put the title beyond Leeds' reach until Kingmakers West Brom took a point off the Gunners and Jack Charlton's winner at home to Arsenal somehow left Leeds top of the table by a point, albeit having played a game more. Leeds' domestic season ended at home to Forest whilst Arsenal's were due to climax days later at White Hart Lane of all places. An eerily comfortable Leeds triumph put the pressure on Arsenal, who ground out yet another 1-0 home win, this time with an Eddie Kelly goal keeping the Gunners in the driving seat. A point behind, the goal average played havoc with the final day in North London. A win would leave the title in no doubt for Arsenal. Meanwhile, a goalless draw would also be enough, but should Arsenal dare to complete a score draw, and the title would be handed to Leeds. In today's money, Leeds' 1 superior goal difference would be a simple measure of Arsenal needing a win. Ray Kennedy's late winner put the title beyond doubt, and 5 days later they completed the traditional League and Cup double that ought to have been Leeds on so many occasions that had only been completed twice in the 20th century. Leeds claimed 64 points, which would have won them the title in 8 of the previous 10 seasons. In June, Leeds got what Arsenal didn't have: 2 European titles, after a couple of draws over Juventus. 2 goals in a twice delayed first leg due to wet weather in Turin was ultimately enough. Away goals to consign Juventus to the silver medal despite their unbeaten status in the competition. If Leeds were prolific in the Fairs Cup, the UEFA Cup proved bizarrely more difficult. Lierse of all teams got a 4-0 win at Elland Road in one of the weirdest humblings an English team has had to take in Europe. The club hadn't made a great start, primarily because Elland Road didn't come into play until September the 18th. In the meantime, Leeds toured Huddersfield, Hull and Sheffield to complete their early games because of an emergency renovation to their home ground. 3 league defeats before October and a League Cup elimination left a potentially disastrous campaign ahead for Revie. But if there was one thing we could take from history, when Leeds' schedule gets lighter, the form quickly follows, and in a wide-open title fight that featured upwards of 6 clubs, Leeds' mid-season recovery didn't need to be too outrageous to be back in the conversation. By the start of 1972, Leeds were typically atop the table. It could have been a tumultuous start to the year though, as Paul Reaney had submitted a transfer request and Revie's desired transfer for this 3-year period was Asa Hartford. Whilst Reaney rode back on his foolish decision, Hartford's medical revealed a hole in the heart, and Revie didn't take the risk. Thankfully, the FA Cup brought wins over Liverpool and Spurs and a kind semi-final draw against lower league Birmingham, as Peter Lorimer returned to immaculate form. Leeds really put the cat amongst the pigeons by slapping 5 beyond a poor Manchester United, and went even better with a 7-star performance against Southampton. Now, this 1971-72 title race has been covered by myself far better in its own special video. Go check out the archives. Here's the Cliff Notes version. April Fool's Day, Leeds surrender their spot at the top of the table thanks to a loss at the baseball ground to now top Derby. Every team trips over themselves to win the title, leaving a ridiculously low points tally of the mid-50s after 40 matches as Easter closes in. Leeds rallied after Terry Cooper broke his leg against Stoke City and after Don Revie made the belated switch from Gary Sprake in net. As the Whites confirmed their FA Cup final spot, they sat fourth with 4 matches to play, 1 behind Liverpool with a game in hand, 2 behind Manchester City with 2 games in hand, and 3 behind Derby with those same 2 games in hand. A loss at St James's Park on April the 19th finally took the title out of Leeds' hands officially before controversy stayed away from the Hawthorns 3 days later in a nervy 1-0 win. April the 22nd was unique in its reading of the league table. Manchester City topped the standings on 57 points, playing their full allotment of fixtures, but they were certain of not winning the league. As Derby and Liverpool prepared to meet in the Midlands, City's goal average was just not good enough to countenance a draw and further slip-ups. Derby got the home win to give them half a chance, as Leeds maintained their own hopes against a potentially tricky Chelsea. 7 days later, as Derby sunned themselves in Mallorca awaiting news, Leeds travelled to Molineux and Leeds to Highbury. Leeds would win the title if they avoided defeat, Liverpool would win the title if Leeds lost and they got a win, Derby won the title if Leeds lost and Liverpool failed to win, Manchester City, well, they can't win the title. All this 2 days after the FA Cup final at Wembley between 2 key figures of the final day, Leeds and Arsenal. The Wembley showpiece event was won by a combination of a Paul Reaney goal line clearance and an Alan Clark second half winner. Revie had completed the set of English trophies, now the matter of becoming the 3rd English team to win a 20th century double. News from Highbury was radio silence. No news as far as Leeds fans were concerned was good news. For as much as Leeds ran an FA Cup hangover, their Molineux opponents had a UEFA Cup final later that week, so everything was on as level a playing field as possible. Of course, there had to be controversy attached. Alan Clark's goal-bound shot was handled on the line, but not seen by the referee. When Wolves tottered up a 2-goal lead, Billy Bremner's late goal was not enough. The second title-winning goal wouldn't arrive, and Don Revie begrudgingly handed the league championship to Brian Clough. And if you thought that was agonising, watch this attempt at a treble. 1972-73 began with a failed attempt of replacing Jack Charlton, whilst Terry Cooper's long-term injury weakened defence. Revie's signings of Trevor Cherry and Gordon McQueen was a relative splurge on the market as Leeds flopped to a 4-0 defeat on the opening day at Stamford Bridge. A pumping of champions Derby 5-0 reignited the season as Leeds kept within touching distance of Liverpool as 72 became 73. As the Clough-Revie rivalry threatened to spill over a Yorkshire Television Awards dinner, Leeds maintained their steely focus on the pitch. Their first appearance in the Cup Winners' Cup dispatched them to Turkey, East Germany and Romania before the trademark Revie performance away in Hajduk Split confirmed the one-off final with Milan. Whilst Norwich needed 3 whole games to be dislodged from the FA Cup, Plymouth and West Brom came cleaner before a sweet quarter-final triumph away to Clough's Derby. Jack Charlton's springtime return from the brink of retirement steadied league nerves in a 1-0 win at Highfield Road, whilst cup progress was made against Wolves at Main Road. Easter was around the corner, 2 cup finals were to come in May and Leeds' title fate firmly in their own hands. But them fucking chocolate bunnies, man. Dropped points at Upton Park, a home defeat to a poor Manchester United before a crucial loss at Anfield, ripped the title from Ellen Road and hand-delivered it to Anfield. Gut-wrenching, but Leeds United had a momentous cup double to come, surely. Nobody had retained the FA Cup since Newcastle in 1952, and somehow the lower league Sunderland ensured that Leeds wouldn't be that team, thanks to Ian Porterfield's 31st minute winner. Leeds had chances, Trevor Cherry's disallowed goal for a blatant foul, and Peter Lorimer's ferocious shot that produced quite possibly the greatest Wembley Cup final save from Jim Montgomery. League gone, FA Cup gone, Milan in Salonika for the Cup Winners' Cup was all that was left. The situation was dire. Facing the European Cup champions of 4 years prior, Leeds were without Bremner, Clark, Giles and Gray. Milan themselves were going for the same treble and got that endeavour on tracks with a 3rd minute winner in Greece, leaving Leeds bereft. A cup double for Milan, a treble of near misses for Leeds. With the feeling that Revie's time was coming to a natural end, he made sure that his reign wouldn't end sourly. He built an Elland Road for the future off the back of a world record fee for goalkeeper Gary Sprake, and despite Jack Charlton's retirement, Leeds began their league season impeccably and improved from there. You'll not be surprised to learn that early exits in the domestic cups to Ipswich Town and Bristol City, as well as an equally shocking UEFA Cup exit to Vittoria Setúbal, them again, created a procession-like atmosphere to the First Division. At their peak, Leeds were 9 clear of Liverpool, but did have each of the top 5 to play. Losses at the Victoria Ground and Upton Park, either side of a double feature defeats at Anfield and at home to Burnley, did not help. Suddenly the easing off to a second league title had become a bit more difficult. Somehow the fate of the title was in Liverpool hands, 4 points behind but with 3 games in hand, thanks to Liverpool's run to the FA Cup final. Thankfully for Leeds, the pendulum didn't take long to swing back in their favour. Liverpool was stunned at Bramall Lane. Even though Easter didn't shine favourably on Leeds yet again thanks to a pair of goalless draws, Liverpool didn't capitalise either. Once all the kids up and down the country wiped the residue of cheap chocolate eggs from their gobs, the title hinged on Liverpool's 2 games in hand and a 4-point deficit. April the 20th all but decided the title. A dramatic Merseyside derby was happening over the Pennines whilst Leeds scraped a nerve-shredding win over Ipswich thanks to Alan Clark's thunderous finish. News from Merseyside was good news. Everton had thwarted their City pals' title bid with a draw. Before Leeds could play again, Liverpool had delivered them the title. Ray Kennedy, who had previously scored a goal that tore the league title away from Leeds in 1971, this time scored the goal that handed them the title back 3 years later in a 1-0 win for Arsenal at Anfield. ITV timed it to utter perfection. They broadcasted an episode of This Is Your Life on title-winning evening, whose subject was none other than Don Revie. Don Revie stands alongside only Kenny Dalglish as the men to have won the Football Writers Player of the Year and to have won an English League title as manager. And he did so in one of the biggest booms of English football. Liverpool had been similarly built up with Bill Shankly, Matt Busby was rebuilding Manchester United after Munich, and that's without mentioning Arsenal, Tottenham, Chelsea, Everton and others. Revie's Leeds could match each and every one of them. In the 10 years he shared with Shankly in the top tier, Revie won 1 more trophy than his Liverpool opponent. Finished higher in the league 7 times, they won a huge 100 more points than Manchester United in the same time frame as well. Of course, Revie was the first Leeds manager to win all the domestic trophies in England and so far the only Leeds manager to win the club silverware in Europe. And yet the 10-year boom period almost stands alone as an island in the history called Leeds United's success. Don Revie was appointed by England as they failed to qualify for the 1974 World Cup, and he was succeeded by the last person the club and the manager wanted, Brian Clough. A terrific manager there was no doubt, but the wrong personality at the wrong club. His 44 days have since been immortalised in the book and film Damn United, the story of which deserves its own video. Then Jimmy Armfield was dropped into the mess and took the club to its only European Cup final, where they were robbed by Bayern Munich, which also deserves its own video. Then the whole club blew up. Gary Sprake sold a story to the Daily Mirror about Don Revie offering backhanders to opposition to go easy on the team. Revie then burned his bridges with his calamitous England tenure, his subsequent exile in the desert, and he remains underappreciated in this country as a result. Then the exodus came. Terry Cooper, Mick Jones and Johnny Giles left in 1975, Terry Yorath, Mick Bates, Billy Bremner and Norman Hunter were gone the year after, Joe Jordan and Gordon McQueen both crossed the Pennines to Manchester United in 77, whilst Paul Reaney, Peter Lorimer and Alan Clark all departed in 1978. Not even Jock Stein could save them, also lasting 44 days, weirdly enough. Jimmy Adamson improved them, but could only manage 5th place and a League Cup semi-final. In the end, only one of Revie's former acolytes would win the European Cup. Frankie Ray did so after signing for Brian Clough's Nottingham Forest in the 1979-80 season. A new tactic emerged at the club in the 1980s, and that was reigniting the Don Revie golden era by placing former players who had played under the manager and made them manager. It didn't work with Alan Clark, who took the club down in 1982. It didn't work with Eddie Gray, who kept them mid-table in Division 2, and whilst Billy Bremner returned the club to the top flight, Leeds were an obscurity in a now Merseyside-dominated division. Peter Lorimer did have a second stint as a player, and his final match came on October the 27th, 1985, in an inauspicious 3-0 loss to Barnsley. That date's significant because it was the last time a Don Revie player played for Leeds. Another date that's significant is October the 10th, 1988, when Howard Wilkinson succeeded Bremner as manager. Only then was the Revie era finally over, and the club could heal again. If you missed the Leeds United origin story, you probably should have watched that first, you silly sausage. Go and click on it now.